It is Sunday the 19th of February 2016. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, engaged in my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy. And I was in the middle of a monologue about how the Unitarian Universalist Association hired Stikeman Elliott, barristers and solicitors litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, to falsely accuse me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel in clergy sex abuse, cover-up and denial legal bullying that sought to intimidate me into removing blog posts that actually tell the truth about such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers, to borrow a couple of choice phrases from the two arrogant and aggressive cease and desist demand letters that Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe had me served with in June of 2012. And the tape run out, as it were. So I don't know quite where it got cut off, so I'm going to backtrack a bit and rehash. Well, maybe I'll rehash everything. So in brief, in June of 2012, June 1st of 2012, I was looking at my email inbox and saw an email from Stikeman Elliott, barristers and solicitors litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, which said Unitarian Universalist Association versus yourself. So it seemed to be some kind of legal letter in which the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston had a beef with me. So I opened it up, and the letter itself, the email itself, was very brief. It just said, please refer to the attached document or something like that, and it had a PDF file attached at the bottom. So I opened up the PDF file, and it was a 2-page legal letter. In real terms, a 1.5-page legal letter, or 1 1/3 page legal letter, but like 1 full page and the top half or third of a second page. And it basically accused me of 2 specific things, but the most serious, or serious is maybe not the best word to use because it was totally laughable, really, but the most serious in the sense of potentially damaging to me accusation was that Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe was accusing me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel for allegedly, and I do say allegedly, making unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. That's an exact quote from the letter. So I knew that although I had blogged about a few cases of pedophilia and or rape committed by Unitarian Universalists, I also knew that they weren't the least bit unfounded, as Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe falsely alleged. They were based on credible reports in mainstream news media about how Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell of the Westboro and Northborough parishes in Massachusetts had been charged, tried, and convicted of the forcible rape of teenage Tibetan refugees, and also how Richard Buell of First Parish Norwell in Massachusetts, the parish of Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, who blogs under the pseudonym Peace Bang, or perhaps I should say the former parish of Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, because she eventually left, I think under a cloud, but you know, Unitarian Universalists like to keep all these things, you know, under wraps as much as possible, so there was no obvious sign, you know, that Peace Bang or Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein had been, you know, asked to leave or pushed out or whatever. But anyway, getting back to things, the upshot is that the accusation of blasphemous libel, which is a criminal act, if a person is convicted of criminal act, they can be sentenced to a jail term of up to 2 years. So, you know, if I or anyone else, you know, was actually guilty of blasphemous libel and found guilty of blasphemous libel, or even found guilty even if they weren't guilty, and if they were falsely charged and somehow falsely found guilty, they could spend up to 2 years in jail. So this is serious in that sense. I was basically being accused of a criminal act that carried a jail term of up to 2 years. Other than that, it was completely ludicrous and laughable. But that's the, in quotation marks, serious aspect of the Unitarian Universalist Association's laughable blasphemous libel accusation against me. So I knew that, you know, my allegations were by no means unfounded. So I wrote back to Maitre Marc-André Coulombe and asked him to please identify exactly which blog post he was talking about, so I could go and have a look and decide how I was going to govern myself. Because, you know, down at the bottom of most legal letters of that nature, it says, do govern yourself accordingly. In this case, it did so in all caps, shouting, you know, do govern yourself accordingly. So, you know, as I said, I knew that my blog posts were very well founded, in fact, based on newspaper reports and so on. But I wanted to, you know, see, you know, what kind of hand that Maitre Marc-André Coulombe was holding. I didn't think he had much of a hand that he was holding. But I wanted to, you know, get him to come out and clearly identify which blog post he was talking about. So then I could come back and say, well, you know, what part of the word convicted did you fail to understand, and so on. So anyway, what happens is, instead of identifying the blog posts by title or internet address, i.e. URL, or even date or something, you know, I gave him several options. You know, ideally, obviously, the title would be the best option. Perhaps the next best option would be the internet address of the blog post in question, and, you know, a date may not be that helpful because there might be 2 or 3 blog posts on the same date, kind of thing. But in any case, Maitre Marc-André Coulombe rather foolishly ignored and dismissed and rejected my request for more information about his blasphemous libel accusation. He wrote back to me saying, your claims not to be able to find the offending material are not credible, and he basically told me, you know, go find them yourself, kind of thing. So again, you know, I knew exactly which blog posts were about Unitarian Universalist rapists and or pedophiles, but I also knew that they were by no means unfounded. And another thing which is quite interesting is, you know, when I first saw this term blasphemous libel, I'd never heard that specific term before. I'd heard of blasphemous and blasphemy and blasphemer and so on. I'd heard of libel and slander. I'd never seen, you know, blasphemy or blasphemous, you know, associated with libel in a phrase, and specifically, you know, a specific law. So, you know, I Googled blasphemous libel and quickly became aware that Canada did in fact have an anti-blasphemy law in the Canadian Criminal Code. One of the things that Maitre Marc-André Coulombe did do is he cited the specific, number or section of the Canadian Criminal Code that covered blasphemous libel. So yeah, I found out that there was in fact a law that prohibited so-called blasphemous libel in the Canadian Criminal Code. The law itself is incredibly vaguely and generally worded. I mean, it really gives no description of what blasphemous libel is in the law itself. I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something like this. It's something like, whosoever commits blasphemous libel, is guilty of an offense and can spend up to 2 years in jail. That's the gist of it. That's all it says. It does not define what blasphemous libel is. So in order to find out, specifically what blasphemous libel is, you have to do more research. But, Google's pretty good for finding out more about stuff, so I Googled blasphemous libel and Canada, because the other countries also had anti-blasphemy laws, and specifically laws that specifically prohibit blasphemous libel. So, Britain had one until 2008. They repealed it in 2008, 4 years before the Unitarian Universalist Association accused me of violating Canada's blasphemy law. So, essentially, blasphemous libel is blasphemy. It's not so much blasphemy in the sense of blasphemy against God, although obviously that would be included, but it includes, it includes essentially defaming a religion might be the best general description, but it has to be quite egregious, insulting and defamatory attacks on a religion that would cause considerable offense. And it has to be attacking, essentially it has to be attacking, what a religion considers to be sacred and holy. It has to be attacking the most sacred and holy elements of a religion in order for it to be blasphemous. So what the upshot of that is that even if I had in fact made unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the Unitarian Universalist Association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, which I did in fact not do. I was in fact not guilty of doing that. Even if I had falsely accused Unitarian Universalist ministers of being pedophiles or rapists or a combination of both, this would not actually constitute the criminal act of blasphemous libel, because it's not attacking, what is held to be most sacred and holy by the Unitarian Universalist religious community, unless, of course, the Unitarian Universalist religious community actually does hold such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape to be sacred and holy to Unitarian Universalism, in some secret doctrine that I'm not aware of. So you can be sure I've had a fair bit of fun with that. In fact, in one of my later follow-up letters to Maitre Coulombe, I made that point. I basically asked him, are you trying to tell me that Unitarian Universalists hold such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape to be sacred and holy to Unitarian Universalism, at least if and when they're committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers? Is that what you're trying to tell me, Maitre Coulombe? Because that's essentially the unwritten subtext of his false blasphemous libel accusation against me. Again, this is probably just sheer incompetence on Maitre Marc-André Coulombe's part. Or it could have been worse than incompetence. You know, he might have known perfectly well what I just said. He might have known perfectly well that I actually was not guilty of blasphemous libel, that I actually could not be found guilty of blasphemous libel. You know, on the basis, on the pretext that he made in his demand. It's entirely possible that Maitre Marc-André Coulombe was fully aware of this and that he was essentially bluffing. You know, this could have been a legal bluff. You know, I don't know what's worse, if it's incredible stupidity and incompetence on the part of Maitre Marc-André Coulombe because he was unaware of the implications of accusing me of blasphemous libel. That's the one possibility, is that he did not know, you know, the full implications of what he was doing. But you know, the other possibility is he knew perfectly well exactly what he was doing. I would say that's actually worse. That's worse than incompetence. You know, that's well, I'll use one of his words, despicable. It's pretty despicable if Maitre Marc-André Coulombe knew perfectly well that I was not, in fact, guilty of blasphemous libel, that I couldn't possibly be found guilty of blasphemous libel for blogging about Unitarian Universalist ministers and parishioners engaging in such despicable crimes as pedophilia, rape. But he went ahead and accused me anyway, in the hopes that I was stupid enough to believe him and deleted the blog post. You know, it could have been sheer intimidation, a big bluff, a bluff that obviously I called very quickly. But yeah, that's even worse than just incompetence and laziness and so on. But you know, either way, Maitre Marc-André Coulombe doesn't come out of it looking very good. And of course, the same can be said about the Unitarian Universalist Association. And here's another aspect of